Welcome to The Prepared Leader, From Crisis to Confidence, the monthly podcast for leaders who know that tough times aren't a matter of if, but when. I'm Helen Lipscombe, and each month we dive into real stories, bold strategies, and practical insights to help you lead with strength and resilience through uncertainty. Today, we're focusing on a sector that quite literally keeps the world moving, but is more vulnerable than many realise. We're exploring transport resilience and what recent disruptions like the Heathrow outage and the Iberian Peninsula power failures reveal about the fragility of modern logistics. I'm joined by Joanna Grove-Lafarge, a leader with experience consulting and in industry, to unpack how organisations can build smarter and more robust systems to withstand these shocks. Joanna, welcome to the podcast. Would you prefer I say Joe?
Joe will be fine. Thank you, Helen.
Joe. Okay. Brilliant. Thank you, Joe. Lovely to have you with us today. It'd be great if you can just introduce yourself and just let everyone listening know a bit more about you and your background.
Yes, thank you. I did like the introduction, by the way. So I have spent a lot of time in consulting and industry. So that's great because that's allowed me to work across lots of different types of organisations. So from financial services to critical national infrastructure, that includes transport.
Yeah.
I like to say my first gig was in 1990. Because I was temping and I happened to recognise that they had a computer that had no backups. So even that long ago, I then took on, temping filing clerk that I was doing at the time while I was finding something more fun to do. I decided to take on their backup and restore process for this printing company. So I did that. Throughout the years, I've done roles such as head of risk for an insurance company, head of resilience for Network Rail. And I do things like embedding processes or frameworks and bringing together the disparate disciplines that bring together resilience. So things like physical security, cyber security, risk, business continuity, bringing all those things together. That's my favourite thing to do.
Fantastic. So all about connecting the dots, which I do believe is a really important part. And I can, obviously, you've got a huge amount of experience across different sectors, and a lot within the transport sector. It's changed a lot, the transport sector. And obviously in the period of time that we're talking about, that you've been working across these different areas, it has changed a lot. Is there anything you can sort of think that makes it more vulnerable right now in today's environment?
There are several things. So aside from the more vulnerable, it's the expectation. So before we deal with the more vulnerable, but it's the expectation of people, because we've had several large incidents. There's all the things we've heard about recently, which we'll talk to in more detail in a minute, but people hear about things quicker.
True.
And there is a bigger expectation for things to be done. Or why wasn't that thought about? And why did it, if things happen, but why didn't they recover quicker? Is always the question. And so there's that bit. But looking at all of the types of transport in this country and globally, but not everywhere, transport systems are really old. We hear this quite a lot. They are old systems that are now running in a modern world and trying to keep up. So there's bits where there's failing areas of it that people are trying to keep going all the time. Bigger expectations, which I've just mentioned, greater volumes of people using the transport systems. So there's all of those things put together that will not have been thought out when they were first designed. So there's so many different areas that can have stresses and strains on them that they weren't designed to do.
Yeah, and it strikes me as you say that, absolutely right, that the infrastructure and the mechanisms that underpin the transport sector are Victorian in some cases, or at least they're
Yes,
that
they are.
kind of
Yeah,
era. Yet the world
yeah,
has moved on, and expectations
yeah.
have changed and should change, because that's
Yes.
transport is so vital to our economy and to the way the world works. Do you think those are the sort of stresses then that really exacerbate the vulnerabilities of the sector?
I, I think they exacerbate the vulnerabilities. There's also the other bit with the advancement of automation and technology,
Mm,
and putting that technology on old infrastructure. So there's that bit as well. So you've got lots of operational technology in, let's think about, all of the systems, all of the infrastructure have traffic lights, whether it's actually on, lights on the railways or traffic lights on our systems, or if you think about tunnels have got lots and lots of operational technology throughout them that is run by computers,
yeah,
run automatically. It's not someone, there are people in there, there's lots of people working really hard in those areas, but there's also lots of operational technology that runs automatically that I think, as well as the expectation that we've just talked about, the fact
mm,
that you're putting modern technology onto old systems, even though some of the tunnels are new. There's quite a few tunnels you can think of, like Hindhead, that is
yeah,
a relatively new tunnel, um, but it's still a hole in the ground that has lots of technology running through it. There will be things that are going to go wrong with that, or need an awful lot of resilience to keep running. Let's look at
yeah.
it that way round. That's the preferred way I like to look at it, not go wrong. It's the resilience to
Yes,
keep running.
exactly. Yeah, and I think that really does highlight an important part about the fact that there are lots, the way that transport is designed brings with it limitations and brings with it challenges, because we are going underneath in some cases, or underneath
Yeah.
rivers, and
Yes.
that when you're trying to then build resilient systems, that adds a whole nother level of complexity, and I guess just means that it's not as straightforward as it might be for things
No.
that you're looking at that are just operating as
Um,
normal, if that makes sense.
yeah, and on the
Yeah.
surface. So I've got an
Yes.
analogy that I like to use. So
Mm.
if you think about your home, and there's some things that will have changed from when you last checked. So all of these systems that we've just talked about get regular checks, there's regulations around them, there's all of this stuff, loads and loads of work goes on behind the scenes to keep them running. But if you think about your home when you last checked, and all the components that go into your home. So there's things like your personal things, such as your clothes. You probably see those quite regularly. They're in your wardrobe. You can check whether the moths have got to them, whether they're clean or dirty. All of that stuff that keeps them up and running, as it
Hmm.
were. And then you've got things like the fixtures, which are the beds, the sofas, the desks, the monitors that are around us, all of that stuff that you can see. Also, you can see whether they're going wrong or not, and you can
Mm.
replace them or fix them, whatever you want to do. Then there's the next level underneath that. You've got the walls, which will probably have nails and screws that you can't see behind them. When was the last time you checked without actually something going wrong that was all still in place? So there's all of these things
Mm.
that, if you think about resilience of an infrastructure that is as complex as our transport infrastructure is, think of
Yeah.
it like your house, the stuff you can see, the stuff you see every day and can check easily, and the stuff that gets either more hidden or is harder to check, all these different layers. And that's where I think the resilience of the transport organization is just so complex.
Mm.
Uh, and then you've got increased wear and tear, increased expectations, all of those layers on top of each other. Actually a bit mind blowing, really.
It is. It
That's
is.
why I love
It
playing in this
it's fascinating,
space.
but also I agree,
It
really
is.
mind blowing. And it's the bit that I agree is the most interesting, because we talk about the connectivity of all of these elements, but the challenge is, how often do we check the unknown or the unseen, and how do we keep that going, to make sure that there aren't those, small parts of this system that suddenly can take down the whole, because we've just lost sight of it, and not keeping that, those regular checks, to keep it operational.
And that's where I think you have to be, that's the pragmatic side of the risk and likelihood.
Yes.
And I know, having worked with lots of organisations, you look at top 10 risks, and they're the normal top 10 risks that you'd find, fire, flood, and all of that stuff that people think, cyber attacks, all of that are in, make the top 10. Sometimes it's the little things that you do need to, you check those ones quite regularly because they're more likely and the impact is higher. But you can have ones that are less likely, the impact can be just as high. So that's one of my things as well, is the risk side of looking at all of this, is you can't keep turning the wheel on the top however many top risks. You look at, it's like you said, the little things that can be that tiny little one screw or nail that hold several things together, that if all the others get slightly loose, that's fine. Not good that it's moving around, but it's fine.
But
and then this
it's
last
still
one,
running.
it's still running.
Yeah.
And that's where I think that's one of my things I like to think about, is that kind of little tiny little thing that can cause the incident to become a bigger incident.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think I guess that is the challenge, isn't it? When we think about, recent failures, like, or recent events, let's say, that have happened, like the Heathrow, power outage, and the events in, Spain and Portugal, is, I guess, thinking about what are the challenges around, learning from those, when you start to think about this complex system that we're talking about, and what should be captured, as positive things coming out of those events.
And I know there's more reports to come out of the Heathrow one. There's the initial report that's come out. There were, 3 transformers. So that appears resilient. We've seen all of this. Everyone's done this a lot. So, everyone's gone, well, there were 3 transformers. So you'd think if you were running that, that appears resilient. The loss of power scenario will have been explored. But there was a partial loss to their internal distribution network that may not have been as deemed as critical. Being careful with my words, because obviously everything is still coming out.
We don't know the details.
Because if it's an internal, just from working with lots of organizations, we will all know that most people look at the external facing stuff, the stuff that keeps other things happening. They usually deprioritize, or further down the prioritization list, internal power, because you go, well, that's fine, because A, likelihood of that coming down, or B, does that really matter, because XYZ, the other bits will keep running. I've not seen a diagram of how that all fits together. So one of my things I love to do is look at diagrams and see how everything fits together and go, actually, yes, that is really important. That little node there is very important, because it's a single point of dependency.
And it kind of almost, to me, comes back to that sort of, housekeeping analogy you were sort of talking about, that list of things you need to check in your own property, or things that organizations need to check. It's how to challenge the let's look at the big things. Let's look at those events that we deem are most likely to happen, and or things that we recognize maybe we have less control over. And therefore we need to spend more time thinking about those, as opposed to the things that we feel like we have control over, and it might not cause us such a big problem. And I think there's that element of, we again become slightly blind to the things that we see day to day, and are part and parcel of how our organizations run, because we don't see them as the big challenges.
No, and it's the wider ecosystem. There's various conversations have been had around that, is looking at the value of your wider ecosystem and understanding it, and exactly that this I understand was done but it's understanding the value of your wider ecosystem and exactly how that can impact you. And as you said, the control you have over that, where you have control, you might have 100% control. You will have 100% control in some areas, and the control will be diminished, but there is still an element of control in these areas, or there is stuff you can do, exercises to run, scenarios to think through, where actually you may not have control over how a transformer has fire suppressant or is switched on and off and stuff like that. But you can still try and understand what would happen to you and where your barriers actually can move over your control over what actually happens. It's the outcome, really, of something happening rather than what happened and why.
Yeah, which I think that kind of is almost comes back to in my own head when I talk about some of these ideas. That's the focus. It doesn't matter why you've lost power. It doesn't matter what's happened, because that's not the bit that you might have control over. But what you need to work through in scenarios and in discussions is, we've lost power to this part of our infrastructure, to this part of our building, whatever scope and scale you want to look at. What would we do, and how would we recover, and do those at different levels, and focus on it that way, because that should help tease out, I guess, some of those blind spots and some of those assumptions that we make around what's in place and what we have control over.
Yes, and it also helps the conversation if you go down the scenario-agnostic route. It helps. So some people will have the answer, and it's the old active listening thing. When you're in a scenario conversation, people will switch off because they go, well, I know the answer to that, and they won't think of other ways of doing it, which is more or less what you just said there. So it helps with people getting creative with responses.
Yes. Yeah. And have you seen people doing that well in your experience, where organizations are good at doing that more event agnostic, I guess, risk planning?
Some are. It's not, because it's not been the traditional way of doing things for a while. It's becoming more prevalent, and there are more of us that do that as well and talk about it a lot. So people are saying, well, the outcome is X. Almost don't worry about how we got there. That is something that's already taken care of, or we can do another time. For this particular conversation, this has happened. Don't worry about how you get there. Some people still can't. The way people think, obviously, a lot of people think different ways. So some people have to have a scenario to think through. So you have to give an outline scenario. Just to get people on the right track of thinking that's the outcome there, and they go, well, I don't know how we've got there. Why would we get there?
To understand the reality of this, because it doesn't sit within my frame of reference. And I think that's a really good point, because that's certainly the biggest challenge that I see when I try and have those conversations, is not having enough of that framework, and not having enough of that understanding, that some people get fixated on that, I guess, just a little bit. So you do need to help them to understand why that might be a realistic scenario to deal with.
You do, yes. So you have to have, so it's a blend. It's not just talk about this outcome, no scenario around it, or we're definitely going down that scenario route. There's the blend of the two, I think, is the one. And as people get better, or have done it a couple of times, they get more comfortable with that. So it's also a progression of moving from scenario exercising. Just there's merit in all of these. All of these are worthwhile. It depends what you want to do. And there's a progression to being able to just talk about an event, irrespective of how it's happened.
And I think that's what people need to be focused on, is not worrying too much about the why. It's the what, the what's happened. If we come back to, I guess, the examples we talked about in terms of those very specific transport events, is there anything in your experience, or in your experience, where you've seen leaders are better at thinking about those interdependencies and better at thinking about how this complex transport system works together?
So I'm not going to name names or
No,
anything like that, which I know
no,
is not what you're asking.
that's not. No.
So I think what I see working well is when decisions are made with the information known at the time. So during an event,
Yeah.
you make a decision quickly with the information at the time, but then dynamically make more decisions and are, based on new information.
Mm-hmm.
So where you have an incident, so power outage, you don't know why, but you make a decision to do something. You have to also, there's so many things I want to say here, all coming into my head.
Okay.
You make the decisions and then you go, okay, so there's power outage, we'll switch those bits off because we know they're not protected, or actually those bits are protected, so switch it off. If the power comes back on,
Mm-hmm.
are those protected from surge? So you just need to have thought through the different layers of how to make the decision. So I have seen a number of leaders be really good at knowing who to talk to find that information.
Right.
So you just go, okay, this is the situation. I need more information to make that decision, At the time, I'm going to make that decision while I'm making more decisions. It's the bravery, is what some people would call it, to make decisions based on that information and then change that as the situation progresses. That's the bit that when leaders lead well during an incident or even during an exercise, which is where you learn to do these things by doing exercises. Brilliant, and putting yourself in a situation which you wouldn't normally be in.
Yes.
I also see it. I have seen it where in organisations, so most transport organisations have incidents every day.
Mm-hmm.
So railways and roads both get blocked for different reasons. And you have to keep the roads running, you have to keep the rails running, you have to keep the country moving. You have to make decisions based on those incidents. It's when it escalates, that's where I've seen things go well, when you escalate well and in time, where it's just a normal incident, but then there's another incident going on over there, and then another one goes on over there, and you realize the three of them are going to create a bigger incident.
Yeah.
When someone goes, actually, you know what, look, I can see the dots. It's again joining the dots.
Join the dots, yes.
Joining the dots again. Those dots, yep, okay, we need to do something different here. We don't treat them all as one, as individuals, sorry, we treat them all as one and make a bigger decision.
Yeah.
That's where I've seen stuff going, leaders leading from the front and making those decisions well.
Yeah. And it strikes me both of those are almost that situation awareness piece, because it is, very changing all the time. Again, as you say, the transport system deals with these kind of events day in, day out. It's just sometimes they are more significant. And the more significant ones are sort of, I guess, where you and I would be there to help. However, you can learn a lot from the insignificant ones about how do they manifest themselves, and what does that tell you about the fragility of the transport system, and what that might lead to in terms of then connecting the dots of, well, actually, if you have three of those things happening at the same time, that becomes a bigger event. But a lot of that is maintaining that awareness and being, I guess, just being
cognizant of it.
Part of all the discussions. I mean, part of making those right decisions at the right time, and not being afraid, I guess, as well where you started in terms of real events and exercising, not being afraid to make a decision and then change it, because nothing is fixed. The world isn't fixed anyway. Things do change and things do evolve as we go forward.
Changing your decision based on, it's not, and it's almost like I don't use the word changing a decision. I would say that you make a different decision based on the new information.
Yeah.
Which is a more positive way of saying it, I think, because it's more information. Information will be coming in all the time. You need to make a decision. And also in the scenario we're talking about, it's almost a fast, we're talking as if it's a fast moving But we have been, both of us, in situations where it's extremely slow moving, so slow it's like glacial. So people don't even see it as an incident, and that's one way you can actually get tripped up.
Yes.
Where there is such a slow incident that, and trending comes into this. There's so many topics I've covered. I'm so sorry. I've gone off on so many tangents.
We can come back to some of these at a later time as well. It's all good.
There will be a whole series for the next 20 years of podcasts. So that's where the trending comes in, where you go, yes, and we said about the 3 incidents, but if it's really, really slow, the courage to go, this is building to something, and actually at this pace it's going to hit that, and that's going to be big. There's another courage thing there. Or leader, I've seen people do that as well, and just take the decision and go, yeah, let's just nip this in the bud. Oh, hello, Steve. Steve's joined the podcast. We didn't introduce. Has Steve been introduced on the podcast before?
Has not as yet. So
okay.
Yeah,
do that. Steve's own podcast.
Exactly.
He is headless. So yes, that's the sort of thing that I've seen. I'm trying to think of what else. I think that also we were talking about the fact that transport organisations run incidents day in, day out. We obviously only see the big ones. Well, you and I see some of the small ones, but the wider public see the big ones that impact them, or the ones that interest them for all the right or wrong reasons. But it also highlights how quickly our transport organisations work. They run those incidents daily, and they're virtually seamless. So they are really good at managing the day-to-day instance that they can get whatever it is up, and the roads or the railways up and running really, really quickly. So that's something that should also definitely be called out.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because I think one of the questions I'd come to, or kind of to sum up things, is kind of, if you're talking to colleagues in the transport sector, talking to individuals that run these organizations, is kind of, what's the one piece of advice that would be helpful to them? And maybe some of it is that
trust yourself to make the decisions based on the information you have. You have that information there, you make a decision, but don't then think that everyone's gonna not trust you if you change your decision. It's like we said, not changing your decision, it's new information has come in. So it's like driving along a road. You're driving straight on a motorway, but actually then when the speed changes, you will change your speed. And then more information comes in. So actually you've taken your speed back down again, or you can take it back up to the national speed limit, whatever. Or your sat nav says, actually the road ahead is really, really heavy. It'd be better to take this next slip road off. So more information is coming in the whole time. So if you think about it like that, using a nice road or rail analogy there for the transport resilience leaders, who are all brilliant at doing their job, as we've just said. But that would work. I would definitely say the piece that makes a standout leader for me is making the courage of those decisions at the time, and then updating those decisions based on new information.
I think that also gives people that aren't necessarily as engaged in the transport resilience world a really clear example of live management of these kind of situations, because you say we all experience that, where you're driving on a motorway and things are changing around you, speed limits are changing, and that's part and parcel of keeping things running. That's why these things happen. So for those people, I guess almost a slight tangent, but for those people that are kind of, how is this working all the day, every day, that's actually a really good, very small to some extent example of how the sector works hard to keep the UK running and keep things they really do operational.
And there's obviously other people that come in, like the emergency services, that help. So yesterday I was driving down the A12, driving along, and a police car overtook us and started doing a rolling roadblock. Timing wise, a slip road was just coming up on the left, and I thought, rolling roadblock, never a good thing. Something's happened up there. I'll take the slip road off and bypass or do something else to get past it. That also works as well. I was lucky. I was 3 cars ahead. Behind, rather, not ahead, behind the police car.
Behind the police car, head of the police car going, I can see you, but I'm not moving.
No. So I slipped up, and that's part of it as well. So that's, I know we've come back to the ecosystem, it's the other agencies that help. So that obviously something had happened, the highways officers were probably out there, all of the people that work on the roads, the security and the watching the cameras, all of those were working to whatever incident had happened. The police came along, did their rolling roadblock. There were ambulances and other things that turned up as well, so I hope it wasn't really horrendous. But the other things are, the people were then funneled off onto the slip roads. I know that because the roads then got really chock-a-block around.
Yes, you can see it again. The evidence of it in local roads. Yes.
So that's another case of how the resilience of using the wider ecosystem. Another example.
Yes. Fantastic. Thank you. Well, really, really helpful and interesting just to hear all about this topic. If anyone, or if our listeners are interested in learning a bit more about you and kind of the work you do, how can they find you?
I am on LinkedIn, if that's the easiest way to find me. There is also, I can put an email address on the end of this, but it's easier to find I'm probably the only Grove-Lafarge on LinkedIn. So yes, Joanna Grove-Lafarge on LinkedIn is the easiest way to find me. That's probably, let's keep it to that, because that's nice and simple, isn't it? We can put if you publish it, we can put an email out as well.
And we will include your bio so people can again just read a bit more about you, and we can include any links you want within that as part of the opportunity. Fantastic. Well, thank you,
lovely
Jo.
To chat.
Really lovely chatting. So really appreciate you do that. You're spending some time with us today and just talking about transport resilience. It's a fascinating topic. If you found this episode valuable, please follow, rate or share with somebody who is responsible for resilience in their organisation. Until next time, stay ready and stay resilient.